Restaurants are this wonderful way to convey a body of knowledge, because on Monday morning when people would go back to their offices, they would talk about whatever restaurants they went to. So if we could put a body of knowledge onto a restaurant, would it not get spread around?
Welcome to episode 18 of the Future is Beautiful podcast. Thank you to our new patrons this week, Robin Sparks, Lysana Sullivan, Paul Swatridge and Becky Birchall. It's very much appreciated. You can join them by visiting www.thefutureisbeautiful.co/community. On this show, we ask the question, how will you create beauty in the world? This week's episode is a behind-the-scenes story of one couple's journey to do just that. If you have ever been to the Inn of the Seventh Ray in Topanga Canyon, LA, you will know what I mean. The restaurant is beautiful in every way. The atmosphere, the food, the nature surrounding it, the bookstore, and how energized the food makes you feel. I fell in love the first time I went to the inn. My guest today is Lucile Yaney, who I met nearly 20 years ago when I got to know her son Jonathan. I was immediately struck by all the teachings that she held, that I hadn't been exposed to growing up in Derbyshire in the UK in the 80s and 90s. She's a therapist and created the Inn of the Seventh Ray with her husband Ralph, and is currently working on some exciting writing projects. In this late night conversation we shared over a cup of tea in her house in Topanga, we get transported back to the 70s in California and hear what went into creating the restaurant, the first farmers markets, and how a group of committed people challenged the dominant story by making their diets plant-based and paving the way for the vegan and healthy living scenes we see today. We also discuss how to live a fulfilled life well into your 70s, 80s, 90s, and perhaps beyond, and what it means to listen to your heart and live a spiritual life. I hope that you enjoy this episode. Welcome to The Future is Beautiful, with me, your host, Amisha Gadiali. On this show, we explore the weave between politics, spirituality, creativity, and sustainability. Every one of us has ideas and personal experiences to share that can lead us to a brighter future. Despite the challenges we face as a global community, or the pressures that we meet in our daily lives, when we stop and dare to dream, to ask ourselves the big questions, and to share what we are already doing, we create the future that we wish to wake up for. That future is beautiful. I'm delighted to be here joined by Lucile Yaney, who is a therapist who also started the Inn of the Seventh Ray, a beautiful restaurant in Topanga Canyon in California. Hi, Lucy.
Hello.
So I would love to start by hearing a little bit about the Inn of the Seventh Ray for our friends listening that have never had the pleasure of coming to Topanga in California. A little bit about what it is and the concept behind it and what led you to opening it.
Well, the inn probably stemmed from our commitment to take a year out of our lives. It's actually a spiritual teacher said something to us that we had been too educated and that it would be a whole different life if we just followed our hearts. And at the time, my husband's, and we never did give up our dharma, but my husband was a psychoanalyst and I was a psychotherapist in Beverly Hills. And we made this commitment that we were going to pay more attention to our hearts than our heads for 1 year.
Just for a year.
and got into a tremendous amount of trouble that year. And doing a restaurant was not even a thought form in our heads. There was this old junkyard in Topanga, and it was a rundown gas station, ex-gas station, and a property strewn with tires and oil and outhouses and junk cars and And down at the bottom was this very dilapidated church with one whole side falling out of it that had turned into the local house of ill repute. And we used to drive by it on our way to Beverly Hills, and I would say to my husband, I hope someone buys that property because it's the last eyesore in Topanga, which is this beautiful, pristine canyon in the middle of the Topanga Mountains, of hills and little cabins tucked away, and it was kind of an artist colony and drug hippie haven. And it had been on the market for about 5 months. And the fall came, and we drove by it one day, and I noticed when the leaves fell off the trees, I said, Ralph, the whole creek runs down alongside one of the sides of that property. So we decided to get out and explore this land. And we climbed over all the junk cars and got out to the little point. And we got out to this point, and this energy just hit us. And our hearts opened, and my husband he wasn't my husband at the time actually, extended his hands, and I just extended my hands, and we didn't say anything. We just got back into the car and drove down to the realtor and plumped $2,000 down to write a contract on this land. And then the test, really, once the intention was set, the test came. Now, it was not our intention at the beginning to do a restaurant. We were working with communities, and we worked more like in a consultant basis because we loved the idea of people living in communities and communes at the time and growth centers. But the dependency would normally destroy the communes. But our first idea was that we were going to give this, to a commune to run, and all the dependent people that were at the commune that weren't pulling their weight now could work in the restaurant, and therefore the base of support for the commune could be secured. Of course, we never had any idea you don't make money at restaurants, but if people are working for free, I guess you wouldn't make money. And so we started out with a plan and design and an idea of this restaurant. And we went first to my husband's bank to get financing, and my husband had a credit line of $25,000, I think. And he could have gone down and bought a piece of art or whatever, but he couldn't start a restaurant. And when we went into his bank, they were very nice and polite, but then they ended up canceling his credit line. Mm-hmm. And I said, oh, my bank loves me, we'll go to my bank. And walked into my bank, buddy-buddy with everybody, and they heard what we were doing, and they canceled my credit line. So, and as I can, looking back on it, really rightly so. But and so we were really without financing. And this lovely lady who owned the property just kept extending while we kept trying to look for financing. And finally, after and we started construction. We started doing the things that we could do with our own resources. And finally we found a gentleman who, found a gentleman after about 2 years that would put up the money for the restaurant. However, in that time, amazing things kind of happened, and one of them was that we bumped into a spiritual teacher, and he said, I have many, many beautiful things to teach you, but your bodies are so dense that my teachings won't stay in your body. Mm. And we kind of knew what he was talking about because we'd had experience with patients where we could have what we thought was an amazing session, and a week later, anything that we said just wasn't even in their memory. It was like working, my husband used to call it working in sand. So our spiritual teacher sent me to this wonderful lady in Arizona, New Mexico, Dr. Hazel Parcell, who had a clinic, and she was one of the very first pioneers in using food to heal yourself. And she herself, she was a researcher at UCLA, and she had cancer, and it was way back in the time when you would open them up, see the cancer, and close the body back up and tell people they had 6 months to live at the best. And she took this little pendulum, and she started putting pendulums over her food and measuring the energy vibrations that would come off of each food. And she only started putting food in her body that vibrated higher than her body. And way before any of the research was done, and way before there was much of a body in natural foods, in this very rudimentary way of using a pendulum, she discovered that if you cooked your food in aluminum, the food would vibrate lower. If you got food that was junk food and had chemicals and preservatives in it, the food would vibrate lower than her body did. And if she went to farmers and got food that wasn't sprayed, it would vibrate higher than her body. And if she gave up meat, the meat vibrated lower than her body. So she became, in her day, an organic vegetarian, pure foods, and put these foods into her body. And 6 months later, she went back, to see her doctor, and there was no more cancer.
Wow.
And so then she went around and she would speak and tell people her experience, and the FDA threw her into prison 3 times. And she finally wrote and created this school, and people would then come to her. And the moral of that story is she has a web presence. She was still coming to that school to teach when she was 105 years of age. And on her, Dr. Hazel Parcell, on her website is her is a video of her speaking. But I spent 2 weeks there and came back a changed person.
Mm-hmm.
And we actually ended up with a partner to go into this restaurant business. And I would call back to him and say, "Oh, wait a minute, we have to send back all the aluminum ware." and then I would call the next day and say, "Oh, our original concept is all off. We're going to be doing something else." And then when I finally got back to Los Angeles, the first thing I did is I put Ralph on these fasts. We dewormed ourselves and did all the different kidney flushes, and Ralph of course, he was in love with me, so he just went along with all of this, kind of amused. And we started feeling really much better. We had more energy and felt really great, and we started realizing that food could make a difference of your whole energy level and your whole functioning level. So we then started with our patients. All of them went on these healthy diets. And meanwhile, we couldn't get financing for this restaurant. But this restaurant was taking this transformation. And we also found, in the course of this, the spiritual teacher that was going to be our teacher for the rest of our life. And we started to learn about vibrations and energies and levels of consciousness, and you know, that whole world that we had just started tiptoeing into. And when all of that was in place, then the investor was found that you know, made it possible for us to buy and build the inn.
When was this? This was
1974. I think 73 is when we purchased it, and we didn't open it till 75. Also, in the meantime, we had this wonderful house down in Malibu, which Ralph had designed and built, which was an octagon, 3-story tall octagon house, and was basically his bachelor pad right on a point in Malibu. And we got up one morning and said, you know, this isn't where we're going. We were going on the spiritual path. So we rented the house out to start the restaurant, and the house burned down. The person we rented it to burned down the house. And here we were, basically almost paupers, because the restaurant opened and we did not make any money, and all of our salaries and everything had to go into supporting the restaurant. But it was we just set our sights onto our vision, and we wrote this kind of visionary paper for the front part of the menu in about 10 minutes. And it's now been 43 years. We've hardly ever changed a word of that original intent of what we were going to do. And we started combining everything that we had worked with our patients into this restaurant. And we started kind of a combination of classical music. The water element, of course, was there. Plants were there. We had a few rules, not many of them, but there was no swearing that was permitted. We hired a staff that was free from drugs, which was really hard to find at that time, and a staff that didn't smoke. And the staff all got together and we did mantras a half an hour before we opened every day. And then we began to teach the principles that I had learned from Dr. Hazel Parcell and had learned since then. And everything we did had some kind of principle behind it. So even though we served steak, it was free from antibiotics and hormones and was grass-fed. And we just started getting this body of knowledge out and our concept. Oh, meanwhile, our original partner thought we were nuts and realized that he couldn't really be our partner because he was definitely a businessman. And so we had about the same amount of money invested. And so we agreed that we were going to flip a coin, and we got a buyout price, and whoever won the coin toss, then the other person would take a second mortgage on the property. And we won the coin toss. So, and because we were the responsible ones, we ended up in this restaurant thing, okay. And we caught the wave of people exploring being vegetarian and macrobiotic, and it was just kind of people were searching, and it just was, and we were the only kind of what would have been, wasn't really fine dining, but close to fine dining that that had all the principles, and and we did have some help. We had a restaurateur that was fascinated in what we were doing and would come out and kind of give us a little bit of advice and here and there. And we explained to him that, restaurants are this wonderful way to convey a body of knowledge, because on Monday morning when people would go back to their offices, they would talk about whatever restaurants they went to or where they got the best bargains or something. So if we could put a body of knowledge onto a restaurant, would it not get spread around a city and be kind of a change agent to the culture of the city? And I'm sure he thought we were nuts too, but he basically, he'd come and say, I think you better put a drain in your kitchen, things like this. And he came back about 12 years later, and he came out to the restaurant, and he instructed the waiter to bring him an empty plate and had us sit down with him. And he said, and he was a pretty well-known restaurateur, and he'd gone to Hawaii, and he said, I want you all to be witness that I am now eating my words, because I said you never ever would have made this. And what happened was we just got inundated with people, and we weren't serving them very well. And Monday morning we were really guilty because we had kept people waiting, and we really couldn't pull it together. And we were losing money, so we couldn't really afford to get a fancy chef, and we were struggling by the seat of our pants. But there was such a spirit and such an energy that pervaded the inn that we just kind of kept going. And we had this big placard over the kitchen set that said, "Keep on keeping on." And it's about the only thing we could do. We just didn't stop. And we saw about 40 patients a week. We would jump into our cars at 6 o'clock. We would run out to the restaurant. Ralph would take the outside, I would take the kitchen, and we'd kind of save the restaurant and get home about 8 o'clock to be with our kids. Then we'd bring everybody down on the weekends, and it became really a family affair because the kids were all part of the staff. And then on Monday morning, early, we would have these meetings, and we'd have to figure out what we did wrong. And I've oftentimes told people the inn is just a bunch of Monday morning projects that we did. So what happened was that we realized that we really had a very special protection around us, because somehow everything always worked out. And about the second year in, one of our customers said, this is where I proposed, this is where we fell in love, we're going to get married here. And he built us this wonderful little gazebo, and we made his wedding feast, and we just exchanged, and it started our weddings, which really have been the most profitable thing that probably has saved the inn. But there were a number of things that basically saved the inn from destruction. The whole field of organic produce, we actually had this farmer girl come in and say she wanted to start an organic stand, very first one in Malibu. And she got 2 other restaurants besides us that wanted to serve organic produce. And she went to the farmers and asked them, to set aside 2 acres or something and plant the produce. And she would go to these farmers and pick up the produce. Some would plant one, some would plant something else, and deliver it to the inn, and then set up her stand in Malibu. And at the time, the farmers were just one by one going out of business because they would they'd be okay for 7 years, and then the 8th year some travesty happened and their plants wouldn't produce. And the corporations were owning about 96% of the farms, and the small family farms were just one by one, going bankrupt. But these little farms that we went to learned that we paid double the price, and probably more than double the price of what they would get when they sold their produce to these conglomerates. And this went on for about a year, and more people were being organic, and more stands were kind of popping up. One popped up in right down at the bottom of Topanga, and they kind of all got together with this one woman that made friends with them, and came up with the idea of the farmers market, the first farmers market in Santa Monica. And these are farms that are still standing today because they got together, formed their community, went down, formed the farmers markets, which have multiplied all over Los Angeles, and converted all their farms to organic farming. And so they've saved our environment, they've saved our bodies, they've saved their farms, and all they had to do was just to start bringing everything into the markets, and they thrived. I mean, they could get 3 times what they could get on the open market. And so we really were instrumental, or this girl was through us, but in starting this whole farmers market trend that has just taken over all the cities and throughout the whole United States. And meanwhile, we kept getting more and more people.
I'm interested in the teachings around food and how you feel they've impacted the lives of some of the people that have come to the restaurant.
People became vegetarian for many reasons. There were athletes that were training, and they recognized that they had really more energy if they didn't put a lot of meat and stuff onto their bodies. So we had the athletic groups, and then we had the animal right activist groups that became vegetarian out of a protest of the way animals were treated. There was a book written, Survival into the 21st Century, that influenced a lot of people back in the 70s. But then there were the people that just recognized that they had more energy. What originally happened to us and our colleagues is there was a meat boycott, and it had to get really quite big before the meat industry would actually negotiate with Cesar Chavez. And so it really had to spread. So everybody was giving up meat because they were treating the workers so badly, and they wouldn't negotiate with the workers. So we all gave up meat. Okay, 3 months later, they finally talked to them, gave them halfway decent living conditions. And we all then had this great big party and put these big steaks on, and it was like we became zombies. We never noticed it in giving up meat, but all of a sudden not having meat for 3 months, and we just said, what happened to all the colors? I mean, all the colors just dimmed down. And we just felt so dense, the best way I could describe it. And that was kind of our very first experience in understanding kind of the vibrations of food and this kind of concept that you are what you eat. And meanwhile, all our staff was vegetarian, and which they aren't necessarily today, but they were. And they were also praying in the morning, and it was wonderful, wonderful staff. They were all part of the local monastery. And we would make some kind of comment or whatever. And of course, we had a bookstore where we had all the teachings of, we divided the bookstore into our four bodies, and we had all the teachings of how to raise the vibration in the physical body, and then we had all the music and the crystals and things of raising the vibration in the emotional body, and then we had all the self-help books that were just popping up all over at that time of how to raise the vibration of your physical body, and then we had all the spiritual books in the back. And that concept and that perspective just spread among the staff and, of course, among the customers. And we had the story that I love to tell is this, and we dabbled with every single new diet and raw foods and, that came along. Macrobiotic, at the time, vegan didn't come along till later. But there was a CEO that left early in the morning, one of our neighbors, and he would stop at the inn and get dinner around 10 o'clock at night. And because he said he always worked better when he had a meal from the inn. He would feel better about it. And so I said to him, well, it was 10 o'clock at night that he was eating dinner. And I said, why don't you experiment with just eating vegetarian dinners? Because it's very hard to put heavy meat into your body at 10 o'clock at night. And just try being vegetarian and seeing how how you'd feel. And he came back the next day and he said, oh my gosh, I had so much energy, Lucy. I was sharp and I was on top of things and just great. So he went along and just kind of had the vegetarian meals. And then about 2 weeks later, I said, okay, want to do a little more of an experiment? Why don't you do raw foods at nighttime? And so this very, meat-eating, whatever, did the raw foods. He found he had even more energy, alive, he was sharper, and he became a raw foods person. Mm-hmm. Just because of the energy, not because of the principles. So we became a drawing point for many people, and it's a beautiful kind of a restaurant, and at the time maybe 50% were coming because of the food, and 50% were just coming because it was a really lovely place to go take a date. But we still kept kind of teaching and showing by example. But at the same time, we started becoming more professional. And so it became a period of trying to even find chefs that would cook with the ingredients that I wanted them to cook with, or bakers that would bake with the ingredients that I wanted to cook with, was always a struggle.
Why was that a struggle?
Well, as Brad said, my head chef is their owner, and really it's taken about 6 or 7 years to come upon it. Food is not as good when you take butter out and you take cream out and you take, even though everything is made from scratch, he really feels it's a compromise, even though we work. And he's able to get some very, very good, tasty vegan dishes. But if you talk to him privately, he always does feel that they're just not as good. Things have just gotten better. I mean, people have experimented and they have found ways to sweeten things and whatever. And when we first started, we really were kind of a laughing stock in the culinary community. And I think for a long time we kind of called hippy-dippy food and things like this. And all the people that made fun of us are no longer in existence. And now most of the head chefs are worth their weight in gold. They're worth their weight. Are down at the farmers markets getting the vegetables. Mm-hmm. They may not necessarily say that it's organic, but almost all your really, really good restaurants are organic. And cook with the good oils and carry vegan menus in most of your places. They certainly do gluten-free menus now.
You've talked a lot about vegetarian and vegan, but the inn does serve meat.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, why is that?
I think it was a decision we made at the very beginning, because we could either say, you have to come and be like us, or is it our responsibility to reach people wherever they were? And we all ate meat at one point. So if we were going to, and we did talk about whether we should do this. And one of our very first customers came with his family, and he said, "Oh, just give me the steak. Leave all those vegetables off of it. I can't stand vegetables." And we didn't serve potatoes at the time because potatoes are not really good with meat. And then he came back a week later with his family, and his family was laughing. He says, "Okay, bring me a plate of vegetables." And what had happened to him was that he had gone home, and every night he was just dreaming of vegetables, and he couldn't get these vegetables out of his dreams. And he decided to come back and try these vegetables, which he said were okay. And we said, that that's really the sign that what we did was correct by putting the steak on the menu. But we, when the chicken went on the menu, it was free range, which Sheldon's was the first and only free range chicken. And then we used to go down and meet the fishing boats so that we can get the fish that were very, very fresh. And so we wouldn't serve potatoes. We served rice, and we steamed these vegetables. And so we served as pure a dinner as we possibly could in each of the categories. And then we listed everything on the menu in order of the esoteric vibrations, what we said. And the vegetables were first, and then the fish, and then the chicken, and then the lamb, and then the steak. And so this led to a lot of joking, and of course we named the restaurant the Inn of the Seventh Ray, and so people would ask what the seventh ray was. And so we gave us an opportunity to kind of give the teaching on colors and the qualities of different colors, and the seventh ray really being the violet ray, which is the last color before you go from the visible spectrum of colors to the invisible. And so we would tell people that it's the last color that you meditate on as you're making a transition from the spiritual way of living to the from the material way of living to the spiritual way of living. And we, gave these teachings in all seriousness, and meanwhile we also put up on the restaurant, we did a number of little meditation gardens. So we had Mother Mary one place, and then we had St. Francis another place, and then we had Kuan Yin another place, and then we had Buddha another place, and we had a picture of Jesus another place, and in 43 years, people have sometimes asked, well, what do you believe, and where does this all come from? And I've just always said that, I think anybody who brings a teaching to earth and it multiplies and bears fruit, and then this is the energy that goes forth and multiplies. And I suspect that when we get to the other side, we're going to see Buddha with his arms around Krishna, with his arms around Moses, with his arms around Mohammed, with his arms around Jesus, and they're all going to be buddies. And it's only us down here that has to divide them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. In the 43 years, I have never, that I've known, had anybody take offense. I've never had somebody tell me I'm going to go to hell because I've some statue of. And it certainly exists, but not at the restaurant. People have generally sat there and nodded their heads, and it's kind of been okay.
Mm-hmm. So for all our friends listening, if you were to give some tips on how to improve their diet, to shift their density, what were some of the things that they could do?
Well, I'd love to start people just by fasting. Because in that process of fasting, and just fasting even for 3 days, you can cover quite a bit of ground. One of the fasts that I oftentimes recommend people is just even an apple juice fast, because you can get rid of your kidney stones and gallstones when they're very small. And passing a gallstone when you're 80 is very, very painful, and here in America it's very expensive. But the secondary thing that it teaches you is that you start to detach from hunger. And hunger is this like iron umbilical cord thing that ties you to addictions and foods, and so for those 3 days you can kind of experience what it is like to be free, because you stop getting hungry the second day. And usually when you finish the fast, or especially if it goes on for 5 days or something, you're just not hungry anymore.
So this would be 3 or 5 days without food, just with water?
Yeah, or apple
juice?
I start with apple juice, apple juice diluted. And they're the master cleanse. There's many different kinds of cleanses. And then your body gets rid of the most toxic things first. Mm-hmm. So whatever the chemicals and the preservatives and the cancer cells and things like that will get passed first. And meanwhile, you get clearer and you realize what energy we put on our bodies just by putting foods into our bodies. And then when you break the fast, you break it with just eating like raw food that now actually tastes delicious, because you're really consciously eating the food. And you can almost maintain that state where you feed your body food to give it sustenance, not because you have these cravings inside of you. And then of course you give yourself a little bit of sugar and the cravings come back and whatever. But so that's kind of the first thing, is like cleaning up the body. And then the second thing is you just stop eating one thing at a time. You just give up one thing. And like sugar is the first thing that I think is on the top of the list to give up. Mainly because cancer cells take 10 times as much sugar as regular cells do. And since one third of us die from cancer, it's the greatest way to prevent cancer is just not to eat sugar, in your lifetime. And also diabetes, because sugar uses up an awful lot of insulin beforehand. And then I think the second thing is, just the chemicals and preservatives that are in fast foods and prepared foods, and to just give up prepared foods. And you can learn how to cook very simply, and there's lots of books out on just changing the way you cook. You don't really have to put a fast food stove or pot pie or something like that into a microwave oven. Third thing is I would not use microwaves, because it basically kills the energy that is around foods. And then each thing just kind of makes you brings you into kind of a higher vibration. And then you just do baby steps. Then the next thing is cutting back. My head chef, when he started, his father owned a butcher shop, and he ate meat all the time. And he tells me now, he's worked at the inn now for 6 years, that he eats meat maybe once a month at the most. And I don't think it was anything he forced himself to. It was just probably listening to me for 6 years. And then you just start kind of substituting things in. I would give up pork first because it is, they've actually found that there's a human DNA inside of pork, which is probably why in all your spiritual disciplines, many of your spiritual disciplines, they warn against pork. And then you go from that to just eating more raw foods, making your diet more into raw foods and less into cooked foods, and then you make that transition. And I knew somebody that had been a raw foodist for about 10 years and got stuck on an airplane and had gone 24 hours without eating, and the plane was landlocked or whatever, and they came around and served a baked potato. And so he didn't put anything on it, and he just took a little bit of baked potato because it was about the only thing that was on that plate that he could eat, and got violently sick. So his body had made a transition to raw foods, and a potato made him sick.
So
coming back.
Is it really, in that sense, is it good to be so pure if we come to a place where a potato can make us sick?
I think, if you're up on a mountaintop and you're meditating and you're not having to live in this world. I've known people who've become fruitarians, where they just gone and eaten fruit for 40 days and have come back, hearing voices and everything because they got their physical body vibrating in a very high place, but they were still quite neurotic, and they still had a big ego, and they still were doing things physically that didn't match that vibration. So I think they have to raise all the bodies at the same time. So I don't know about being raw foods if you're not getting up every morning and spending a good amount of your time in prayer and meditation and
how else do you raise all four bodies at the same time?
I think they have to go together,
But how? I mean, a lot of the people listening might not really know what the four bodies are or how to raise them.
Well, one of the things that people have found is even if they start their day with a half an hour of prayers, if they start their day with a half an hour of yoga, they can end up with more energy. If they start their day by jogging for a half an hour, they can end up with more energy. If they, when people go through therapy, generally they don't get sick. So one of the things I've noticed, because they work out their life at at the wisdom level, and then it doesn't cycle down and get sick. Mary Baker Eddy's she couldn't get herself well until she actually went into prayer and meditation, and then her whole body was healed. So these bodies all, I think, have to work together. You can't just send one body up to a higher vibration. You bring them all up together. You can't be living with a lot of anger and unsettlement and guilt and shame and a turbulent emotional body. And then go into meditation or go into church and then come back and be angry. It's you have to also work. The emotional body should be like a crystal clear lake, or otherwise it will always pull you down.
And how do you clear your emotional body?
You make friends with it and you learn to trust it. And let's just take a very simple, and this comes out of therapy, but let's take a very simple relationship. You have a relationship with someone, and let's say and if you see life as always kind of finding a balance in a relationship. Let's say in a relationship you start to give too much, and you keep giving and giving and giving. There's going to be some point that you'll feel resentful because you're doing all the giving. Okay, if you're doing all the taking, so that's one point, is where you feel resentful. And you learn to trust that that's your boundary. If you start to feel resentful, you're doing something that's out of alignment with your higher self. If you end up taking too much, then you're going to feel guilty. So you have these two wonderful poles inside your emotional body that are boundaries where you can operate in between. You can have a healthy kind of give and take without disturbing them. But as soon as you go over that boundary, then, there's these little red flags, and anger or guilt, emerge. So they're there really kind of as guides. And when you don't pay attention to them, and you go over the boundary, then, it's anger, and then it's rage, and then it's murderous rage, and then you pull out a gun and kill somebody. It's just it's somebody who hasn't paid attention and stayed within their bounds.
So you're turning 80 next year, and I think we must have met 15 years ago for the first time. And one thing I've noticed being here is that you haven't really changed. You have the same amount of energy that you had when I first met you, the same amount of excitement about life, the same level of conversation, brain activity. See you in the restaurant, you're keeping track of everything, running up and down the stairs. For a lot of people, life starts to really slow down. We're kind of, I guess society tells us that life sort of ends around 70 or something, so that's when a lot of people switch off. And now you're at a stage where actually you're not slowing down with the restaurant and you're opening up to other things as well. Where do you feel like that energy, that lifestyle, and also you don't get sick, your immune system is strong? Is it a combination of all of these teachings that has brought you into this way of being?
Being a therapist, I do watch my thoughts. And I was interested to see did I have any kind of thoughts about retirement. Because I just didn't have any thoughts about retirement until maybe about 6 months ago. And it wasn't retirement. It was time to go and write, and to stop the business stuff. It's time for people that are younger to take over the business. And I think it was partially because there were so many demands. I had just opened up not too many, but I had opened up so many avenues. And I had to finish cycles to even get the energy to even think about making a transition. So, you know, if you have 12 kids and they all have emergencies and things like this, you just don't stop. You wouldn't stop. I mean, there are people who have had to take on the children of their children and raise them. And when they have these responsibilities and things in life that they have to do, then that kind of drives the pressure, drives the adrenaline, that drives the body, that drives everything. Now, that being said, I also watch my body like I wouldn't burden it.
Mm-hmm.
Mainly because I don't think I could function if I really burdened it very much. And then I think the other source of energy is just how much time you can devote to staying kind of under your own vine and fig tree and your higher self and God and the angels and whatever you want to call it. But there's an energy that when you kind of stand still and allow whatever becomes kind of the higher sense of energies to come into your body. I think it happens when you're doing yoga, when you're, praying, when you're meditating, when you're listening to classical music sometimes. When you just keep a vertical focus and you just breathe and you bring energy into your body. I think also, there's also a lovely figure eight flow on the horizontal level where you can be connecting with somebody and there's this energy that flows between two people.
Mm-hmm.
And you can have that experience and leave feeling charged for having that experience. But I think the vertical's probably a little more powerful. And it is, I do need to step down from the in. I mean, I have to decrease so the people can increase. But I'm not, I'm not going to sit on a cruise, I'm going to start another project that I can do on my bucket list of things. In fact, I think I one time said that there wasn't. I went into my doctor for my physical, and she said, if nothing's broken down by the time you're 80 or 75, she said, you will live to 100. And you don't really have to come back here next year.
Wow.
And I said to her, yeah, it's going to get through my list will probably take me up until the time I'm 100. I don't think my list is going to end.
Mm.
And so you can put things on your bucket list. And there's lots of things that are nice to do when you're 80. You can go do pottery. You can do
Mm-hmm. So it makes a difference, like what is on our list, like what we tune into being important
Mm-hmm.
things for us to do with our time. And if we create those intentions, then we will find the energy. Yeah. Thank you, Lucy. It's been so great to talk to you.
Thank you for listening. As always, you can find links to everything we mention in this episode, download our book, and discover so much more over on the blog. We don't believe in selling you things you don't need through this podcast, and so it's made possible by you, our community. If you loved this and would like to contribute to our Patreon campaign or join our online group to connect with other listeners, please visit www.thefutureisbeautiful.co and click on community. Please also hit subscribe and leave us a review on iTunes so we can grow. Here is to us, creating a beautiful future together.